Thanks, and welcome to the Wednesday, March 27th, 2024 meeting of the Redmond Planning Commission. I'll call this meeting to order and start with a roll call. Commissioner Woodyear.
Present.
Commissioner Aparna.
Present.
Commissioner Van Nyman.
Present.
Commissioner Sheffrin.
Present.
Vice Chair Weston.
Present.
And I'm Chair Sherry Nichols. I also want to acknowledge staff joining us tonight and extending their workday. We have Lauren Anderson, Lauren Alpert, Audra Cardenas, Glenn Coyle, Jeff Churchill, Becky Fry, Jenny Liebeck, Tim McGarg, Kim Dietz, and Chris Wyatt. Look for a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 And the agenda is approved. We also have a meeting summary from the March 13th, 2024 meeting. Look for a motion to approve that.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And the meeting summary is approved. This is the opportunity in the meeting where we where we take public comment on any item that is not the subject of a public hearing.
We have two speakers tonight.
Okay.
The first is David Morton.
Okay, David, you know the drill.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm David Morton, 19934 Northeast Union Hill Road, Redmond, 98053. Here are my opinions on Draft 3.1 of the Climate Resilience and Sustainability Element Policies. I really like the following four things. First, comprehensive approach. The policies cover a wide range of areas including greenhouse gas reduction, resilience, transportation, buildings and energy, natural environment, and waste management. This comprehensive approach is essential for addressing various aspects of climate change. Second, incorporating equity. There's a clear emphasis on equity throughout the policies, with specific attention given to vulnerable and underserved communities. This is crucial for ensuring that climate actions benefit all residents equitably. Third, long-term targets. Setting long-term targets for greenhouse gas reduction, like 50% reduction by 2030, provides a clear roadmap for action and accountability. Fourth, integration with existing plans. The policies are aligned with existing plans like the Environmental Sustainability Action Plan and the Redmond Climate Vulnerability Risk Assessment and Strategy. This helps ensure coherence and efficiency in implementation. But there's room for improvement in the following four areas. First, clarity and consistency. Some policies lack clarity and could have more precise language. For instance, FWCR 1 mentions equitably reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It would be helpful to define what equitable greenhouse gas reduction entails. Second, specificity in implementation. Some policies could be more specific in how they will be implemented. For instance, CR5 mentions aligning budget and procurement decisions, but lacks details on how that will be achieved. Third, community engagement. While there is mention of conducting inclusive outreach and engagement, it would be beneficial to outline specific strategies for engaging the community during the implementation process. Fourth, monitoring and evaluation. While there's mention of evaluating and updating targets over time, an ongoing monitoring and evaluation process based on real-time data and feedback could ensure adaptive management. Maybe Redmond's environmental sustainability data dashboard could be mentioned somewhere in the element. And I suggest 5 additions. First, climate change education. In addition to the policies for providing education on the risks of extreme heat, mitigating wildfires and smoke, and the need for water conservation, consider adding a policy for providing awareness of and education on climate change. People should understand what climate change is and how it's caused and how to address climate change. Second, natural climate solutions. Enhance emphasis on natural climate solutions for climate resilience, such as green infrastructure, ecosystem restoration, and Redmond's vegetation management plan. Third, disaster preparedness. Considering the increasing frequency and intensity of climate-related disasters, perhaps a reference to RMC 2.20, emergency preparedness, could be added to CR 12. Fourth, partnerships with indigenous communities. Given the importance of traditional ecological knowledge in climate adaptation and mitigation, consider establishing partnerships with local indigenous communities. Finally, circular economy initiatives. Expand policies related to waste management to include initiatives promoting a circular economy, such as product redesign and repair programs. In conclusion, overall, the draft policies demonstrate a commendable commitment to addressing climate change and promoting sustainability in Redmond. Refining the language for clarity, enhancing specificity in implementation strategies, and fostering community engagement are essential for effective policy implementation. Consider adding areas of focus like climate change education and natural climate solutions to further strengthen Redmond's resilience and sustainability efforts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Devin Kellogg.
Hi, good evening, commissioners and planning staff. My name is Devin Kellogg. I'm a parent and teacher in the Redmond community. I live in Education Hill. I just wanted to bring up just brief comments on 3 topics that you're discussing in your study session. The first is the utilities. I sent out an email earlier and to giving details, but roughly I'm hoping for stronger language around the natural gas phase out mentioned in that utilities section. The second is the climate element, which at first glance looks really good, as David Morton mentioned. And I'm just really excited about the direction and the leadership of Redmond on this issue. And there'll be more to come after I've had a chance to look through it. And the last topic is infill exemptions, which I think at the previous meeting, Commissioner Woodyer said something about what could we be missing, and it's I just wanted to point out the way I understand it is these exemptions are not just for the centers, but for anywhere middle housing is being built, and that includes existing neighborhoods. And that means that the SEPA would be waived for any construction. And my concern is that how that would impact trees in the neighborhood that are existing. And I mean, we have the tree coverage in one of the elements, but is that protected when they come in and they can waive the SEPA for building? How are those trees protected? And then the others, permeable surfaces and runoff, as you've heard Dr. Morton mention many times. And then the final point that I was thinking about was air quality, and specifically around the building of pipelines. So please consider those as you go through the policies. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we have one additional speaker, Vanita Bardwaj.
Hi, I'm Vanita Bharadwaj, 98052. Hi, I am resident of Redmond. I came to US in 2019 after my marriage. I was on a dependent visa and didn't have any work authorization at that time. I was in abused marriage and separated from my husband in 2023. I am the sole caregiver of my younger 3-year-old daughter. As a resident of Redmond and a single mother, I would like to mention that living in Redmond has been very difficult due to the rental prices. It is hard to a single immigrant parent to afford to live in this city. if you would like promote affordable housing and mandatory inclusionary design, it will help residents like me and my daughter to continue living in the city and this country. Thank you.
Thank you.
There are no additional speakers.
Okay. So we will move on to Redmond 2050 Residential Regulations, Public Hearing and Study Session. And Audra. Sure.
Good evening, Commissioners. So we are here to present the residential regulations packet. And let me go to the next slide. We are going to go over a brief introduction of the item, and then we'll have the public hearing. Then we'll jump into some of the issues that were raised at the last meeting concerning the residential size analysis, some illustrations, going over the timeline, and then we'll jump into the issues matrix. So this item pertains to the residential zoning districts, specifically the residential zoning regulations. We are consolidating all our residential zones into two zones, which is neighborhood residential and neighborhood multifamily. The first, neighborhood residential, consolidates all R1 through R8 zones, and we are implementing middle housing, which complies with HB 1110 from state law. And it also implements our housing action plan. And neighborhood multifamily consolidates all the zones from R12 to R30. And it basically upzones almost everything to the R30 standards. The packet also includes updating the zoning map for the residential areas in overlay, and also updating some definitions in the zoning code. And updating accessory dwelling units code and design standards. So I think, do we have to? Yeah, I think we can go back to the public hearing now.
That's the end of the presentation.
Yes.
It's time for,
Yes.
so that we can hold the hearing.
Yeah, before going into the public hearing.
Okay. So I'll open the public hearing.
So we have not received any written or verbal comments.
Okay. And I don't see anybody here signed up for it. So I will close the public hearing for verbal comment, and for now, leave it open for written comment.
So now we can go to some of the issues that were raised at the last two study sessions. One was we put a limit on the single-family total square footage of 4,500. So we went into our permit data, and we did a query on the single-family unit size. Just a little disclaimer, this data only goes back to 2015 to last week, so it's 2015 to the third week of March. And the permit records include all the square footage of the permit, so it's not just the dwelling unit. So it's a little bit, we are overestimating a little bit the size of the dwelling units, but here you can see that we have a big frequency on single-family dwelling units between 3,500 and 4,500 square feet. I know there was some interest from commissioners to discuss if we should lower that maximum for single family. So I hope this analysis helps to feed into that discussion. We also found that we have a big number of units that are higher than 4,500, like almost like 30%. Just keep in mind that the permits have all the square footage, not just the dwelling units. And then there was also interest from the commissioners on seeing some of the illustrations, how this will be implemented. So we took 4-unit maximum dwelling unit size, so which is like 9,000 square feet, and put it in 3 different sizes of parcels. So we took a 3,000 square feet lot, a 7,200 square feet lot, and an acre lot, which is roughly like R1, R4, and what is now the minimum lot for neighborhood residential, which is the 3,000 lot. And here you can see how it sort of fits. The setbacks will stay the same in all of the parcels. I think that was also a question that was raised. So the setbacks would stay the same, but not only the setbacks are feeding into this analysis, we also have to take into account the maximum lot surface occupancy. So it's not just one thing and then taking the setbacks and then just having all the structure. We have other things that will feed into how this block will fit into the parcel, right? And in the smaller lot, it doesn't fit the biggest, the 4 units, the maximum square, but it still could fit a 4 units. It just needs to have a different configuration, or maybe like combining typologies or combining maybe accessory dwelling units and maybe 1 bedroom, 2 bedrooms. So it gives flexibility to the designers to do what they want. So this box is where they can fit the units, right? Next was, we were trying out different sizes of dwelling units in one parcel size. So this is like the middle-sized parcels. And for one dwelling unit, this is how it would fit the 4,500 square feet maximum. That's how it would look. Then we have the 4 dwelling units, which is a 9,000 square feet total. And then we have the 8 dwelling units, which doesn't really fit. That's why we put like in red. But it still could accommodate 8 dwelling units, but smaller sized or combining. So that's what we wanted to show in here. And finally, we have different lot shapes, and all the same regulations would apply to different lot shapes. So for example, the flag lot would have, the development would be in the flag and not on the pole. And also a lot of things depend on the specific site. So if you have like trees, heritage trees, or maybe something important that you need to maintain, those still would apply, right? So it's just, and some of these lots, even if they are irregular, they have the space to accommodate this middle housing. And yeah, that's it on the illustrations. And next, after this, we will have another study session on April 10th. And I don't know if there are any questions or if you want to jump into the issues matrix.
I think we can just move. Do you have a question before we move in? Okay.
I just had a question about the 4,500 square feet max area.
Yeah.
When we look at that, so I'm assuming that all attached garage is captured in that square footage, correct?
In the table, you mean?
Yes.
Yes.
So in that 4,500 square foot, like if you go back to that graph on the different sizes, so if we looked at a 2-car garage, it's probably between 600 to 700 square feet. So that brings down the house area to 3,700 square feet approximately, right? So just out of curiosity, I don't see the exact, it says, if you could go back to that slide, I can just, because the notes say that it is likely to have captured that data, right? Which often includes area for decks, etc. So is it included in this number or not, is my first question, right? Because what I see is in the report on page 47 in the technical report, there are questions about whether this would preclude middle housing being built if we cap it at 4,500 square feet.
Yes, we are capping like having one unit in a lot would be capped at 4,500 square feet, yes.
Right.
And this analysis on the data includes everything, so not just the dwelling unit, but also garages, decks, whatever. So the numbers are a little bit higher than they should be. But if we lower, I mean, we could, I think the discussion is up to you if you want to lower that number, so the maximum single-family unit, should we lower that maximum? Or if you want to leave it at is. So this is a question for the commission if you want to discuss this number.
Right, and so I would ask the commission this, and there's also another thing here, because we don't know if the bigger homes are having maybe a 3-car garage. We don't, like some of the newer homes have 3-car garages. That could be in the higher end, but since we don't know if this permit information is capturing all of that, I am still unsure if that's the number I would want to go with. Any thoughts on it?
So just to clarify, we are sure that the permit data captures every square foot that's part of the permit application.
Okay,
It's just not an apples-to-apples comparison.
Yeah, it's
That
not
we're
just
sure
the
of.
dwelling unit, because in the regulations, we're setting a 4,500 limit to the dwelling unit without the garages or anything
Right.
else.
Okay.
And the permits do include that, so that's why it's not that direct comparison.
okay, got it.
Commissioner Weston.
So just as an example, using my house again, if you were to rebuild my 1970s house today, like the living area is 2,200 square feet, but that includes over 1,000 additional square feet for a 2-car, like a 1970s 2-car garage and a back patio and a covered walkway. So it's like an additional 50-ish% on top of that is all that surrounding piece. So to me, this graph wasn't actually, it's great to have data, and it was actually really interesting to go in and like look at some of the permits to just be like, kind of sanity check my reaction to that. But to me, these seemed actually not a small amount high, but quite high, because they don't include the garages or the patios or the decks or like, right. So it's just like, when we're talking about 4,500 square feet of living space, that's not what this graph is talking about exactly.
I get that. I just wanted to be sure, because what that means is, let's say let's say that we say 4,500 square feet on a lot, right? That includes garage, whatever, like however they may.
No.
That does not, when we talk about capping a single residence at 4,500 square feet, we're talking about living space. Livable area, heated, it's usually like the area you heat.
The ceilings have to be the right angle.
okay.
Like,
That's what the 4,500, we're talking about capping.
Okay, so the garage would be separate?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Then I would say it's a bit on the high side. Personally, I would like to understand if we are going to have, and for me, 4,500 square feet of livable space, it's a question of demographics then. Have we got a multi-generational household with 5, 6 people? Or do we have a couple with no kids in that household, right? So then it becomes, we are literally making less space for people with families by doing this way. If the demographics don't add up. So I need to kind of understand this a bit more. If anybody has any guidelines to show me this, because what I'm seeing is, I'm seeing a lot of.
I think one thing to understand is this is permit data from 2015, so it's not capturing the entire city.
Right.
And if you look at the houses that have been built more recently, they are big, even on smaller lots. You go up to North Redmond and look at those houses, they are larger. So, I mean, I think it's a question of, do we want to try to capture what is sort of the current max of what's going on in Redmond and freeze it there, or do we want to push the current max down from that? Or what? But I mean, I think 4,500 sort of, if you take the outliers out, I would say 4,500 square foot of living space is sort of the current max. I mean, there are ones bigger than that, but they're kind of outliers. So the question is, do you want to freeze the max at that, or do you want to push it down or make it bigger? That's really the question.
I feel that if you take, let's say we want to build a 4,500 square feet home, and we put all the bells and whistles in it. Like, let's say a developer comes and gets this lot and builds this max size house with all the bells and whistles. Will those numbers be comparable to, say, 2 homes or a duplex, right? Because that's the idea. We're trying to create more housing. So if the numbers don't add up, at 4,500 with bells and whistles, will it be similar in comps to a duplex in that same place, which is 1 extra living unit?
So I just want to jump in here. We have different max in the table that we showed last time. We have different max size for 2 units, 3 units. So every time you add a unit, you get 1,500 square feet more. So yes, you would have more space. We're trying to incentivize middle housing, and this is a way to have it, like limit the size. So if you want to build more, it might make more sense to just build 2 or 4 or 8 or whatever, right? So that's why we put that 4,500 in there. But if you wanted to push that down, it's a discussion that I pose to you, and you can decide. But from the data analysis that we did, I think the average size from the permit, so it includes everything, is between 3,500 and 4,500 square feet right now. So if you wanted to get more granularity, we can go into the assessor's data and get more accurate information on just dwelling size, but this is like a first pass, and to see like what do you want to discuss with this 4,500.
Commissioner Van Nyman.
So that was close to getting to what I was thinking, which is, can you explain to me the policy objective? Like, let's back up and start from scratch again. I know we've discussed this before, but what is, if that number were 3,000, as an example, how does that policy impact the real world, is what I'm trying to understand.
So I think there's a balance that we're trying to achieve here. I think it's exactly to your question. We want to encourage middle housing. The lower that number gets from 4,500 down to 0, the more middle housing is encouraged, because the more it is incentivized versus doing a single home. So if you push that number from 4,500.
A developer is going to be able to make less profit off of a 3,000 square foot house as opposed to a 4,500 square foot house, and so they're incentivized to say, I would rather subdivide. Is that?
I'd rather build a duplex that I can build 6,000 square feet.
Maybe that's the wrong terminology. I would rather build additional units.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, and then so the flip side of that, what we're trying to balance that with is, well, there's going to be demand for single-family homes. We know that demand exceeds 4,500 square feet today per living unit, at least for some segment of the market. And so the question you have to ask yourself and consider is, how important is that? Is it more important to encourage middle housing? Is it more important to keep that segment of the market alive? Where do we want that balance to fall? And that's how you land on a number. Right now, there is no cap for the size of a single-family home in Redmond, except insofar as there's a height limit and a lot coverage limit. So there is an effective cap, but there's not a numerical cap in the code.
Yeah, I mean, I think one way to think about it is as our older neighborhoods, as those houses start aging out and people start buying them for the lots and tearing them down, what do we want those houses replaced with? I can tell you if we don't change anything, we know what they'll be replaced with. McMansions, enormous McMansions that fill the lot. So, go ahead.
Do we have a sense of how this policy change will impact our shortage of housing? Like, is it minimal? Is it substantial? Is it?
So we don't have a lot of experience in Washington State because it hasn't been the law for very long, and there are few communities that went ahead and did this in advance. You know, Spokane is one that adopted a middle housing legislation in advance of when the state required. If you look at other communities around the nation, Minneapolis is a good example where they allowed this kind of things to happen on land there. What they saw was a significant uptick in the production of those kinds of homes. And I think, and I would also add, there is no silver bullet to housing. It's a both and kind of thing. But in the housing action plan, this is one of the both and actions, and it's also required. So we need to do it. But what we're talking about today is like, what are the details around what it's going to look like?
Okay.
Commissioner Parna.
Okay.
Oh,
No, go ahead.
No, so I am thinking if we could reduce it, like, I'm not saying go down to 3,000, but somewhere a little lower than that allows everybody a fighting chance to get that home they want, but people could come in and build duplex. So I'm thinking that 4,500 is on the higher side. So personally, I would say I would be okay between 3,750 or 4,000. Not 4,000 would be a reasonable number, just because I think I would still say it's high, but my gut is telling me it's 3.5. But to be fair, we cannot not have people build single-family homes as well. So,
Mr. Weston.
So I agree that just as a residence, 4,500 seems high to me. However, I can think of so many counterexamples where it starts to sound a little bit more rational. Like there's absolutely one where someone's working at home, like in a loud scenario where it helps to have like business space and residential space combined.
3,500 is huge.
It's really big, but I can still, I can almost wrap my head around that. I'm definitely not arguing for bigger houses. When I think of what does a 4,500 square foot house look like, I'm not arguing for that. Like group homes for seniors, or assisted living, like the residential type buildings, a lot of those are in much large, just to get the number of bedrooms and then caretaker. I don't know. I can kind of see a case for it. That's a really hard thing.
Really
I guess my question would be if someone did have a more understandable use for it, is that something where they can come and ask for an exception to this code? Or is this, we're basically trying to say these are the limits and there really aren't exceptions?
These would be the limits. Something like assisted living there's a whole code section just for that kind of thing, like in Emerald
Amazing.
Heights or a Fairwinds or something like that. So that is not going to be governed by this. But like an adult group home would be.
Oh, bummer. Okay.
As it is today.
Okay.
I mean,
Well, wait, Commissioner Van Lyman had her hand up first.
That was my comment, was that the group home I don't know what type of space requirements they typically have, but it seems like we would want to be flexible there. That is a scenario where maybe they really do need that much space, and those are an important part of how people receive care.
Now,
I mean, I would also say that examples of multi-generational households would be an example where you would need larger size, but I don't know how this policy would encourage that or enforce that. And so given that, assuming that holds true, 4,500 feet does seem a bit large.
my house is 2,900 square feet, which is huge. And think of another I mean, 1,500 above that is another house. Go ahead.
Does it include basement space or daylight basement space?
If it's heated, it's generally,
If it's occupiable space, heated space, it's included. So that would include daylight basements or basements that are finished.
generally the rule of thumb is if it's heated, it's included. Go ahead. You know more than I do.
Oh my gosh, I have so much to say. Just to answer that, and I want to bring something else up that we've not yet talked about, which is from an appraisal standpoint. But to answer your question, and interestingly, appraisers do not consider livable area below grade in the calculation for square footages.
Taxation.
I can't address what the assessor says. Maybe that's the case. So that's something. I also want to comment on the observation of 4,500 square feet being large or whatever. I'm concerned about whatever that number is feels really arbitrary to me. And I think that there would be a caution saying, we're going to cap it at 4,500 because we feel that it's really large. And I'm not going to argue that it is or that it isn't. I think that that's so few and far between that we actually see building permits or individuals wanting to construct a home that size. I think that there's so much incentive to provide middle housing, given the other regs that are being discussed, that I don't know that that's even an issue. And I personally would rather see the fair market decide how many, single-family homes at 4,500 will actually materialize over time. That's that comment, and we can continue that discussion. Then I also want to share something that was just brought to my attention last week, and maybe I'll just go with it since I have the floor. I attended a seminar last week where one of the speakers was an appraiser, and it was really interesting, and it didn't even occur to me. When, given the House bill in providing middle housing, appraisers or residential appraisers have the license to appraise properties for up to 4 units. Anything more than 4 units becomes a commercial appraisal and a commercial use. So I found that to be really interesting, as well as how that ties to mortgages. So individuals who are interested in purchasing or selling a property now that they've added middle housing or these additional units, and we'll talk about the how momentarily, but I don't know if that's going to become cost prohibitive. In other words, if there is a individual who wants to create 5 units and then in turn sell them, number one, it would have to either be a condominium or something of that nature, and we can talk about what the strategies are that the city is contemplating. But it also entails having to have a commercial appraisal. And the reason why that there's a distinction is most lenders subscribe to, and underwriters subscribe to Fannie Mae underwriting criteria. And so that criteria, irrespective of whether or not an individual wants to get a mortgage loan, whether the mortgage or the lender is going to hold the loan or ultimately sell it, it still typically has to comply with Fannie Mae criteria. So that also is, in essence, becomes a cap of 4 units. So then the question becomes, if we increase density, are we also increasing the cost for, or perhaps creating a disincentive for middle housing construction? And I don't have any answers. I just wanted to bring this up as a conversation and a topic to discuss. And maybe the city has some ideas about how.
Tim has his hand up.
Thank you. I think the data that Audra showed in her presentation indicates how the market has decided how to use these land resources. We're seeing houses that are substantially over 3,500, 4,500 square feet. That's what the market currently is developing, and it's choosing to do so despite the fact that the city of Redmond has allowed middle housing within those zones for an extended period of time. So I think that's the first point. I think you make some good points about lending and appraisal criteria, but if someone, the issue also comes up relative to applicable building code. So if you are building more than 4 units, you're going to have to build to a different building code. than what you would typically be able to build for a single family residence or fourplex. So there's a lot of factors that are going into this, but we're not obviously going to be able to solve all of those issues. I think that there's, as Jeff indicated, there's not a ton of data out there right now in terms of how this is working in other communities. Minneapolis is an example, obviously. But I think as this kind of liberalization of traditional single family zoning starts to change around the country, I think it's going to be, a lot of things are going to have to evolve, whether those are underwriting criteria, appraisal criteria, building codes. All of those things are going to have to evolve in order to get us where we need to be in terms of providing a sufficient number of residential dwelling units to accommodate the population in areas that are growing rapidly. So yeah, very good questions. I do want to say, answer the question about how we anticipate these units to be divided for separate ownership. So there's two options. One is, as you indicated, a townhome, or excuse me, a condominiumization. That is typically what we see in the city of Redmond when it comes to dividing townhome product for separate ownership, or obviously condominiums. There's another option for townhome ground-oriented units, which is called a unit lot subdivision. We see less of that because it's additional process. And so developers typically will want to get those units, once they're constructed, to market as quickly as possible. And they can avoid that through the condominiumization process as opposed to going through the unit lot subdivision process. Both of those are obviously subject to the same set of state regulations for common interest communities, since that changed at the state level several years ago to kind of make it comparable between a townhome common interest community and a condominium. So that's generally where we're thinking as far as segregation for individual ownership goes.
Thank you, Tim. Audra?
Yeah, regarding the commercial license to appraise these, this issue has come up with other jurisdictions. So we have a meeting for how to implement middle housing among many jurisdictions, and this has come up already. So it's probably going to impact many jurisdictions, and there's been some discussion on how to bring it up to the state levels to see how this would be implemented. But yes. Thank you for bringing that up.
And I think, just to tag on to that, as Tim said, in the short term or medium term, this may be an issue for someone who wants to build, or an added cost, who wants to build 5 or more units. We're only providing the option, but I don't think it's going to disincentivize someone from doing 4 or less, because that will always remain an option.
This conversation is great. So I just wanted to add in the point, I don't think we have to necessarily look to like Spokane or Minneapolis to get some data on this, because right next door in Kirkland, they changed their ADU rules like just before COVID. So when you look at what's happening in Rose Hill and downtown right now, Kirkland, so that's just right next door, we're seeing a huge mix. So you're definitely seeing the enormous homes that pop up. You're also seeing the subdivisions. You're also seeing the condo, like subdivided lots that each sell separately. You're seeing joined condos. It's like the entire set of options is available, but you're not seeing only stamped out huge homes. And so I think that I'm not exactly sure if they set an upper limit or if they just opened it up and said, here's the advantage of being able to build more. The one thing that I would point out that I'm sad about is none of those are affordable homes. They're all luxury. And so, which one of the advantages to middle housing is supposed to be that you're getting the density, but you're also like sustaining a neighborhood and sustaining a community, and there's more options in that. So, I don't know if I'm having trouble drawing conclusions from that. The 4,500, I really agree that it does seem a little bit arbitrary, because I can very much, my previous points aside, I can really argue that it's way too high and it's incenting the opposite of what we're going for. but I'm also not sure I kind of feel like it makes more sense to sweeten the pot towards middle development, which maybe it does just by adding in that set of, like, you get more space on the lot just by virtue of having more units available. So I'm really torn on this. I think it's difficult.
I think it is an arbitrary number. Any number we pick is going to be arbitrary, but I think if we don't cap it, I think we know what will happen.
If I can just say, but I do think what was working before with the lot coverage and the height limitation, like I could potentially see an option where you get extra height if you have more units, for example. Because I feel if you get extra height if you have more units, I feel very differently about like any sort of middle housing that goes to 3 floors than I do about a single family home that goes to 3 floors. So I don't know if that plays into it.
I think there's definitely more opportunity for more thought in terms of how do we rationalize 4,500, because if you're seeing a trend where there's demand for 4,500, then you can make the implication that you're going to see more of that and less of the middle housing. So I'm not seeing the rationale, and I would love to see that. And then also looking at Kirkland, I'd love to understand how they've shaped their policies, because I actually don't think it looks good. So I know that, you start thinking about the neighborhood, the design character standards and the neighborhood look and feel. I'd love to just understand that more and to make sure that as we land on policies here, we have the rationale that gets the outcome that we want, but we also don't lose the things that we care about, which is the look and feel and accessibility and all those other things that's written into the draft.
I don't know, one way to probably look at this is to see if we can get any more data from those permits in terms of demographics. I don't know how much of that is not possible. Okay, because
So there are no demographics associated with the permits.
Right.
Okay.
We can get building size.
No, yeah, no, not necessarily like, oh, these many people, but it's broadly, we have to kind of understand who's building these homes. If it is a multi-generational household, we understand.
No.
I know, it's anecdotal though, right? What I'm looking for is some way of breaking this tie and figuring out what that looks like.
I would start from the assumption that there's basically infinite demand for large single-family homes in Redmond. To first approximation, because we have a large tech company paying good salaries with high stock price.
Right.
So to first approximation, there's a large unsatisfied demand for single-family homes.
So in the one, you can bet, and I'm going to just shut up. All right.
Go ahead.
Anecdotally, what's interesting now, and this is only just today, the market is such that while the salaries are high, prices are high. And so what's happening today is that those individuals who are buying with these, double income households are buying homes that are well under 3,000 square feet because that's within their affordability range. They're not looking at homes that are larger than that because they can't afford them. That's today. The other comment that I wanted to make is when we're talking about the larger homes, one thing that's coming to mind is homes that are waterfront along Westlake Sammamish, for example. You've got topography considerations, right? And a lot of those homes want to become more vertical in order to to preserve the larger trees because you're talking about vegetation that creates slope stability. And so for good or bad, some of those homes are quite large. And so I just want to reinforce, I'm real concerned about capping the square footage. Thank you.
I've been trying to do just a little bit of counting so that we can figure out where the commission is. And there does not seem to be a majority interested, there's 6 of you, which is also kind of an issue. There doesn't seem to be a majority interested in reducing the number. There does also not, and there's not a majority interested in getting rid of the number either. So I think that's where we are right now. And in 2 weeks, we'll have a different commission. So I'm not sure that we'll be able to solve it tonight, but.
I would suggest at this point that we move on, because I don't think we're going to resolve this tonight. And it's on the agenda again, April 10th. And we've already spent a fair amount of time on it. Okay, one more thing.
Yeah, just if there's any data you can bring to the table which will help us understand this better, really request you to, I don't know what that is, but anything along those lines would be really helpful. Like a little more maybe granularity on the graph, maybe, I don't know. I have no idea what I'm looking for, but we need something to break this tie.
Before we move on, do we want to go through the rest of the issues matrix and close any of those out? Okay.
I just had one thing I wanted to add to the issues matrix. It isn't.
Okay.
On the 4,500, I just wanted to understand what the requirements are for a minimum. Like, what counts as the absolute minimal unit? Do we have a minimum square feet? Does it need to have a kitchen? Like, what are we talking about? Because I know Seattle's like really looking at what they're doing with micro-housing. And so if someone had like a common space with a common kitchen and then units that were very small and didn't have those things, or just had like an efficiency kitchen or something. I'm curious what we're saying on the smallest end. On the other side? Yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, so typically, a lot of micro-housing, those are not technically dwelling units per se. A dwelling unit, per the building code definition, requires a living area, a kitchen, and a bathroom. And so a lot of micro-housing product includes things like communal kitchens or shared baths, and then a private sleeping living space. And so it would depend on, how those are put together. In terms of, the minimum size, but for it to be considered a dwelling unit for the purposes of middle housing or anything else in the Redmond zoning code, we would use that distinction of the living area, a kitchen, and a bathroom. And that's what we do, for example, to distinguish between, say, like a guest house and an accessory dwelling unit. You're not subject to the accessory dwelling unit requirements, and we'll consider it something else like a guest house if you don't have one of those elements. So typically what gets taken out or not included is a kitchen. So you can have a sink, you can have certain things, but you can't have, plugins for space for a dishwasher. You can't have plugins for a range or oven or anything like that. So I don't know if that answers your question, but a lot of units can be as small as 300 square feet and include all three things.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. So
we had two issues still open in the issues matrix. Let me just go to them.
It was one that was open because you weren't at the last meeting. Number 2 that we left open for you. Commissioner Van Nyman.
Number 2, yeah. So this was how the regulations scale, and we showed some of the illustrations. I don't know if we can close this.
Okay.
Close this one. And then there was another one.
Number 4 was open.
Oh, sorry. 4, sorry.
Yeah. This is the unique lots.
Oh, yeah, unique lots, unique shape.
Yeah, so I appreciate the extra diagrams for sure. I think what I'm still struggling with a little bit is the idea of a cul-de-sac, like a mini cul-de-sac off of a cul-de-sac, because a lot of those weird kite-shaped lots are on a street that is already, like you're on that bulb of a cul-de-sac, which is why they made them so non-rectangular. And then if that was subdivided into multiple lots, and then you have like another little private cul-de-sac off of the main cul-de-sac, that just seems like a very, very difficult space to me. And I'm not at all sure what the solution would be. But it's some of the things that we talked about last time just in terms of like getting emergency vehicles in or just egress issues. I still think the diagrams, I think, did a good job explaining them. I don't think they necessarily help solve them.
So I'm going to maybe not answer your question again. And at the risk of doing that, though, say that I think what you're asking is really focused around subdivision.
Yeah.
And those are rules that exist today and are not changing. And so this is really about how many units you can put on a lot. And so we can spend more time on that, but we're not actually proposing to substantially change subdivision regulations.
Yeah, I think the biggest issue is right now the lot minimum size that was set in the 70s for a lot of these homes that actually have the kite-shaped lots. You really can't subdivide them now, just based on the like existing R5 or R6, whatever it is, zoning around them. But now you could subdivide them into 3 with the 3,000 square foot minimum. So it does suddenly open up a whole new world.
Just in terms of the minimum lot size decreasing.
Right.
And that minimum lot size is the same as exists in the R8 zone today. So there's precedent for that kind of.
Oh, I know, but I'm just specifically talking about all those 1960s and 70s neighborhoods with the cul-de-sacs.
Tim has his hand up.
So yeah, my personal opinion is that we're not going to. So subdivision is a whole separate process, and it requires a lot of review, particularly as it relates to things like access and utilities and things of that nature. I don't necessarily see that this is going to spur a lot of subdivision activity where it was prohibited previously. I do think it's much more likely that someone is going to come in if they want to get 3 units out of 1, for example, which is what you indicated, not just cherry picking that. I think it's much more likely that someone comes in and does 3 detached units and condominiumizes those. It's a much more straightforward process. It will take a lot less time. There's a lot more certainty. There's a lot less bonding and other associated process costs. And so I would be surprised if this really kind of upends neighborhoods in terms of creating very small lots out of these unique shaped existing configurations. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, sorry, I might not have been totally precise in the way I'm talking about this. The example that I'm looking at is just up the hill from me in Rose Hill on the Kirkland side. You have places where they used to have private lanes, which function pretty similarly to the cul-de-sacs that I see in my neighborhood in Redmond. And it's, those lots used to be one house. They're now usually a house, an ADU, and a dadu. So detached ADU. Mm-hmm. So you have effectively 3 units. They're handling how that actually works a lot of different ways. But it's visible because then they go up for sale and then you can go to the open houses. But it makes for a very, very compressed number of homes on what is still a private 1-lane road at the end of the day, now with a new driveway off of it. And so I don't think it's actually, there aren't that many places just with HOA rules where this is actually going to go into effect. But I am concerned about that situation where you have what's already a difficult or sort of a compressed traffic pattern, and then it could spawn off a lot of extra development in these few neighborhoods where it's actually going to be allowed.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what you described there with a primary residence and then 2 ADUs. That's a very likely scenario. under middle housing, we would consider that to be 3 units on a lot. And we're allowing up to 6. So, that's exactly what is likely to happen. I mean, in fact, I think that's what we're hoping will happen. And then, those units could be segregated for individual ownership through the condominiumization process. So, that's, we'll just have to see how that plays out in terms of CCRs and private covenants that currently prohibit this. My personal opinion, again, is that the state will see how that affects middle housing, and then that will be the next thing that the state comes for.
Yeah, I think what I'm like really getting at here is that what I'm hoping is Redmond would provide a little bit more information about like either the parking or the access or something. Like if you're going to have all of these on one lot, that you're like that there's maybe parking on the street side, or we've talked about some of the kite-shaped lots with the really small access in front.
So these have like private roads?
They have a shared driveway.
A shared driveway.
And generally, the way Kirkland's rules work, I think all the ADUs need 0 to 1 parking spots. So you generally have 2 with the main house, and then 0 or 1. But they have the same problem that a lot of our neighborhoods have, where it's hopefully with more density at some point, they'll have the bus access, but really functionally to live in them, they still need cars.
It's basically a shared driveway.
Right, but with no parking.
It's the shared driveway.
Right. I don't know. I would love.
That way. People are.
No, they're definitely selling it that way. Definitely people are buying it. But then what ends up happening is then like the roads become congested, less safe. It's hard to get back into those homes. It creates a problem because it wasn't planned for up front. And I'd love to avoid that because I think it makes it very stressful to live in. And then you have situations like trash day where it's like, where does everyone put their cars? Or fire access, or an ambulance, or what have you.
I'm just going to ask my question. I don't need an answer, but I'm starting to get more confused even as the conversation goes on, because the idea of what is a unit and who owns it is confusing to me. And then we're talking about the idea of maxing out a house at 4,500, but if there's another dwelling unit, now can go up to 6,000. So if I put a second kitchen in my downstairs, now I have 2 units and I can build a 6,000 square foot house, and I can build a guest house, and that also counts as another unit, and that's.
What we're talking about is total square footage for the lot. So if you have 2 units, the total square footage can be 6,000 square feet. You can divide that up.
But nobody says I have to rent it out.
No, you could have a second unit
That's right.
and
So
live in each
this,
unit.
Just this concept of pushing the market to do what we want it to do. Like, I mean, as we sat
We
here, I
always
came
do.
up with the loophole, right? So it's.
We
There
always
may
push the
be-
market to do what we want to do.
I'm just saying that. I know. I'm just saying that that's to me like you're renting it out. When you build the next unit, you got permitted. You had the extra dwelling unit on your property. Well, that's just part of my house.
Some people may use it as part of their house, and many people may decide to rent it out for the income.
I'm just.
Tim,
Yeah, I find that to be a highly unlikely scenario.
Yeah.
Each ADU is going to have its own separate entrance. You're going to have to plumb all of that. They're going to have separate service lines running. So I don't understand the point of, maybe it would be fun to have 6 units on your property and, you could rotate and sleep in each one for each day of the week with, doubling up on a Sunday. But I just can't believe that someone would go to the time, effort, and expense to take advantage of that loophole. Of course, there are people with more money than sense, but what would be the gain there? You wouldn't have contiguous living area that, so it's not like you could do a primary dwelling unit and 2 ADUs and they would all be connected together and flow together as as a living space. They would all be segregated off as individual units. And if you wanted to do that, and not rent them out, that would be your prerogative. For example, a lot of multi-generational households, which is something that came up earlier, that's exactly what they will do is, they will have separate units for, grandparents, aunts and uncles, things like that. And they will have separate units. They will not segregate those for individual ownership, even though they could.
Right. There's a reason they're called granny flats.
Right.
Where are we on this open, closed?
This is just separate. I loved all the different charts and the context that was provided in this document. It really helped me wrap my head around this. This conversation has reminded me that it would be really beneficial to have one summary chart so I can just kind of read through and see how all these different scenarios play out. Because I'm finding myself have to line up the different charts to understand like what one can do and what can't do, because there's so much complexity and volume of standards. I think it'll solve a lot of the questions we have too.
So back to 4.
Yeah.
It sounds like your concern is about parking.
Well, my concern is that it's like I actually want the middle housing.
Sure.
And I think that when you look at what's happening other places in the code, there's so much clarity about what makes a livable lot and like what the setbacks are and where the parking should be and like how that relates to the exterior and how that relates to like the neighborhood relates to the house and all of this. And what I'm worried about is there's going to be a ton of market incentive to go redevelop these difficult lots. And like trying to apply that same set of standards to these weird, like predictably weirdly shaped ones. There are just so many of them in Redmond right now. I don't think it's the same, like it's a real like second tier experience compared to the rectangular lots that I think are much easier to subdivide, but that won't stop people from subdividing them.
Subdivide. Wrong word.
Well, maybe yes.
Put multiple units on.
Okay, sure.
Subdivide is a technical term.
Right. I actually kind of mean it both ways because I'm seeing it both ways near me.
Tim.
So I think the reality is that, these uniquely shaped lots, lot configuration is, a substantial issue in design. And so while you may be able to get, 3, 4, 5, 6 units on here under the regulations, the reality of the situation is that it's going to be difficult to get that many units on a lot of these infill lots, particularly if you have a unique configuration. It's just not going to be possible to lay everything out and meet the requirements for, things such as lot coverage and impervious and all of that. And a good example, and I'm not picking on your flag lot example, but that's a lot of driveway. That's a lot of impervious surface coverage that is consumed on that lot for the stem portion of the lot, the pole portion. And so that amount of impervious surface counts against the amount of impervious that can go on the more rectilinear portion of the lot. And so by the very nature of that lot configuration, they're not going to be able to achieve the amount of intensity that they need to get a lot of units on the lot. And that's just going to play out, based upon the individual configuration of any given lot. So I hear what you're saying. I just think that, the likelihood of a substantial number of these lots achieving a maximum of 6 dwelling units is very small. That's going to be the exception rather than the rule, in my opinion, for both a regulatory perspective as well as all of the issues that were brought up previously regarding appraisals and building code types and things of that nature.
Absolutely. And I'm not arguing at all actually for the 6 issue. I'm more actually arguing for the 2 to 3 unit issue that we know, like, so a third of the units on my street are these kite-shaped lots because we have 2 cul-de-sacs. So it's just like, I think that there's an opportunity here to say like, where do we actually want the parking to go? Where do we want, just to make sure that it's actually an intended consequence, not some of the crazy things that I'm seeing done a mile away from me under the current like ADU rules in a neighboring town.
Do you want to leave this open?
I kind of would, but was specifically with the, at least just one more round, because I think I just would like that parking, and I hear what you're saying about the impermeable surfaces. I hear what you're saying about the lot coverage. I still think that what is happening up the hill, I could fit on my lot today, but the parking would be crazy. There'd be tons of driveway. It wouldn't, I don't think it's actually what's trying to be achieved here, but it's allowed.
Maybe you could bring a picture of.
I'm happy to bring a picture. Yes.
If you could send
Send
us the lot, then we can.
I can send you a whole bunch. I'll show you like exactly what I'm
Maybe just a
talking
couple.
about. Okay.
Are there any open houses this weekend?
So we're leaving this one open. Okay.
Thank you.
We're going to move on to number 7. This one is also you, about maximum heights.
Yeah, heights. I think this was referencing if there could be, like, which exceptions would go, and specifically, you were talking about decks, right?
Roof
Yeah.
decks.
So do you want to keep it open or close?
This is my question, but I didn't actually have a strong preference. I just more wanted clarity. So I'm open. That piece, I don't want to like throw it out to the commission, but it's like, if it's fine with people, it's fine. But I just wanted the clarity. Are we allowing roof decks or not? And it sounds like yes. Okay.
So if it's not covered, then it's not considered another story. And Tim, please jump in.
Yeah. So under the current building code, you can have a roof deck. And once it becomes covered, as Odra indicated, then it is a story, considered another story. And that's going to push a 3-story house into a 4th story and trigger additional construction requirements to be able to do that. Plus that cover in all likelihood is going to exceed the maximum height requirement. From what I understand from our plans examiners, the next iteration of the building code is in all likelihood going to be more restrictive relative to rooftop decks. And the thinking is, again, we don't know what exactly is going to come down, but what the talk is that it's becoming more restrictive in the sense that even uncovered roof decks are going to be considered occupied floor area and count as a story. And so how that's going to affect things, in my opinion, it would be, obviously if you've got another story that you're having to build to, there's a significant construction cost of having that be considered, the difference between being considered a 3-story structure under the building code and a 4-story structure under the building code, because the open area would be considered occupiable floor area. So it's going to become less likely because it will become more expensive to be able to do that, even if it is uncovered. So that's what I know about the building code.
Amazing. Thank you. Ready to close.
Okay, let's close that. So that's all the open ones. So there's still one open, and you'll deal with it next time. Okay, so then we're going to move on to Redmond 2050 SEPA regulatory amendments and Overlake Neighborhood Plan Addendum Study Session. Becky, you still with us? Good.
I am. 1 second. Let me get everything loaded. Good evening, commissioners. I have for you tonight a updated PowerPoint from the briefing that we provided to introduce these last month. And then we have some new information in your packet. So what I'd like to do is I'll run through the PowerPoint really quickly, and then I'll run through the draft red lines of the Redmond Zoning Code Section 2170, because this packet is the first time you've looked at it. And then what I'd like to do this evening is to open up the issues matrix and have you give me what you would like to be on there, so that we can come back and really get a kickstart on it, because your meeting on the 10th is going to be so long. Don't necessarily have a lot of answers for you tonight, but I would like to at least jumpstart the issues matrix this evening, if you don't mind. So again, we've got two pieces and parts. There's one that's related directly to all of the SEPA related regulation updates. And then we also have the Overlake Neighborhood Plan addendum. They are a number of different pieces and parts, but we're bringing them together for a number of reasons. But again, another reminder, the Overlake Neighborhood Plan is slightly different than what we would normally see with a sub-area plan, because you've seen all the components and pieces and parts in various forms. We're just assembling it into an addendum so that we can get recertified. So the level of review for that is different. So again, the SEPA regulations are a number of different pieces and parts. So they're coming from the work that we've done here at Redmond 2050. There's some pieces and parts that are coming to respond to some state law changes and just some overall procedural updates. So it includes expanding categorical exemption thresholds, which are things that the state just says doesn't need SEPA, and they're categorically exempt. And so we're matching our categorical exemptions to recent updates. We're adding infill exemptions, which is a type of categorical exemption that the state has recently expanded. And so we're taking advantage of those infill exemptions under state law. We are updating the Overlake Planned Action, which is just updating to accommodate growth and mitigation for the growth in Overlake. We're also doing just some bits and pieces from an equity and just general review, such as removing his and her, and just other types of language updates. Also, since we're in here, we are updating some general procedures and requirements, partly just to update to process, and partly because recent state laws related to process are going to have impacts in Section 2176, and we need 2170 to match some of those other things that we're doing to accommodate recent changes in state law. And then we're removing all of the mitigation details from 2170, and they're moving to an Appendix 11 for the SEPA planned action. And that's just so that it becomes a more usable document, and it doesn't just bog down 2170. So this is all of the SEPA related regulations. It's a mixed bag, but they're all pretty straightforward. So hopefully we can proceed without too much confusion. But as one of the commenters in our public comment earlier did mention, that the SEPA infill exemptions are going to be citywide. There's going to be some type of coverage, and we can talk a little bit to her questions as well when we get there. So the categorical exemption changes in state law are twofold. They're around single family and multifamily. Right now, we do not have in the city code a category exemption for single family. And so we're proposing to add one in. The state law allows for a SEPA exemption for any single family developments of 100 or fewer units if the unit size is 1,500 square feet or less, or less than 1,500 square feet. So what this would mean is those 4,500 square foot units or whatever would not be SEPA exempt, but the smaller units would be. And then currently in our regulations, we have a multifamily exemption set at 60, but the state law allows up to 200. So again, this is just a matching, fairly recent, but not too recent change in state law. So infill exemptions, there's two pieces here. Again, an infill exemption is classified as a type of categorical exemption. The assumptions for infill exemptions are that one, we have done our SEPA evaluation already. And so we intentionally did the SEPA evaluation and documentation under the Redmond 2050 SEPA documents. So in the supplemental draft EIS and the final EIS, it called out the fact that we were going to be doing the infill exemptions and what are the standards that are in play that cover the environmental concerns for these types of development that would be covered. In order to do the infill exemption, you have to show that your existing regulations already address those concerns. And so that it has been documented and that process has been done. And so the infill exemption simply is a process change, but you still have to comply with all the regulations because in order to get the infill exemption, you have to show those regulations exist. So the tree regulations, the wetland regulations, the seismics, and all of those other things are still going to be at play, and everything's still going to qualify and apply. It just means that they do not have to do a project level SEPA evaluation because we've done it at a citywide level and we have the regulations in play. So the two pieces in state law that we're going to be tapping into for infill exemptions are these two sections of code where we've got 4321C to 292A and then 3. 2A has been around for a little bit longer. 3 was just adopted. And so we're going to take advantage of both. 2A just allows for residential development, mixed use development, and commercial developments of up to 65,000 square feet. So we're going to allow those in our downtown center, our Merrimore Center, and in our mixed use zones, so that we can get that mixed use and commercial development under that infill exemption. Again, all of the environmental regulations apply. They're not exempted from those regulations. They just don't have to do the project that will SEPA. The newest infill exemption that the legislature adopted is this one just says every housing, as long as it's just housing. It's not mixed use. It doesn't incorporate anything else. Is exempt. And it just goes all single family, missing middle, multifamily. It actually mentions missing middle like 2 times in there already. So any residential development, if it's just residential, would fall under that infill exemption. And so what we have stated is in our residential zone, so our neighborhood residential and our neighborhood multifamily would qualify under those exemptions. So the planned action review for Overlake, again, we have to accommodate growth and just updating those growth numbers. What we are doing, because we're changing the geography where the SEPA planned action is covered, it's going from OBAT and Overlake Village zones to just the Metro Center. If you're in or out, you're qualified. If you're in, you're not qualified if you're out. But there's an overlap. And so there's an area that will not be covered under the new planned action that is covered under the old. And until that old expires, we're going to reserve the right for that area to continue doing work under what's left of that existing planned action. So there's some language in there that just makes that allowance. Essentially, it's the west section of the overlap business advanced technology zone. And that existing planned action expires in 2030. There is a development agreement. The development agreement expires in 2028. So it just kind of keeps all of that in play until everything just expires. Then it is updating the mitigation measures. We did a whole update of our best available science. And then obviously what is needed to accommodate growth involves a lot of different things, from pipe resizing to transportation and mobility improvements and everything. So all of the things that need to be done to accommodate growth and the mitigation for that growth under the planned action is now going to be in Appendix 11. And so we're going to move that over, then we're just going to be cross-referencing everything. And so there's a couple different things that we have quantified here because existing regulations do apply. We did want to make sure that those were called out as well, that there are some regulations that are acting as mitigation measures just because we're requiring them. So we've symbolized everything. This is a mitigation measure would be above and beyond existing code. And then the performance measure is where existing code is really acting as a mitigation measure. And then we have a whole series of information, including a checklist of things for applicants. And then the overlay neighborhood plan addendum, as I mentioned, is required for certification. All of the policies in the document are ones that you reviewed under the center's plan review in the overlay package. There's no new policies in there. It does also assemble policies from the transportation element and whatever, anything that's related specifically to our recertification process we just put in there. We didn't edit them. As we go through and finalize the actual comp plan, if there's any edits in those policies through our normal comp plan process, we would just update the document here as well, and they'll just go for adoption. And just one final note, that's the maps in there are placeholder right now. Our GIS folks are updating those to help us zoom in and standardize them because we pull them in from many, many different documents. So what you see before you will be cleaned up a little bit as we go through. But there's also one other piece I think I mentioned last time, the actual certification checklist I put in there as an appendix because the numbering of the pages will change. I didn't put the page numbers in yet, but I will insert the page numbers. But I didn't want to have to do that multiple times. So that's the presentation. I'm going to switch over and open up 2170. The first section has some examples in here where I mentioned where the state law has changed on process, and we just want to be consistent with the changes that we're going to have to make in 2176 to be in compliance with that change of state law. It's just no longer 90 days, that type of thing. We just didn't want to refer to anything in this section that would be changed over time through any edits in 2176. So this next section is where we're updating the actual categorical exemption thresholds. We've referenced them here. Again, we're changing his, her, and that type of thing. This lands covered by water section is just being simplified, and it's just being updated to match current regulatory language. We're not creating anything new. We're just trying to simplify it to match existing. And then new section 2170.095 will be the actual infill exemptions. I am going to be updating this map to have streets and that type of thing on it to make it easier for people to identify. There'll also be an online map as well, just identifying where they all apply. And then we've called out specifically which infill exemptions by code we're going to be going for and asking for. This section here excluded activities. In November of last year, the state issued guidance on what cannot be covered under the infill exemptions. So we've used that as the starting point. We've actually added a few things in here as well. These first two are based off city comments. This first one here, as you may recall, when we did the preferred alternative allocation of growth to Marymore, we studied more growth than we actually assigned there. But the compromise at that point was if somebody in Marymore would like to go up to what we studied, which was the 12 stories, especially if they wanted to do like a 12-story mass timber, they could just do a project level SEPA, which is today's process, right? And so at that piece, they would just study the implications that they would need because we did not do that in our preferred alternative. So since it wasn't in the preferred alternative, it didn't get updated with the sewers and a couple of other modeling that we only did for the preferred alternative. And then we just clarified the critical aquifer recharge here too. The rest of this is all just straight from the state law guidance that was issued by Ecology in November. And then we're just updating the infill exemptions. I do have a number being calculated that I will insert that before the public hearing on the 10th. So then in the SEPA planned action, again, it's just updating things. You're just changing it to the Metro Center boundary. We're reserving the rights for OBAT that where those areas are being excluded from the change of boundary. And then updating the thresholds to match the preferred alternative. And then we're adding this section here where we can shift the development between residential or non-residential if development over time needs to be shifted, but as long as it doesn't exceed the total. It just gives us a little bit of flexibility. And then again, it's removing mitigation measures from 2170 and just referencing Appendix 11. And the applicability is also moving to Appendix 11. And then there's recently been some changes in state law processes. So we just wanted to reference the tribal and agency notification and community meeting requirements. So just complying with state law in a very blunt way. And then we're updating the monitoring as well. The state law changed to update the periodic review process went to a 10-year cycle and it went to a 5-year reporting cycle. And so instead of having a separate review process, we just updated the section to match the 5-year reporting process. So it's just consistent with that. And then substantive authority is just being streamlined and cleaned and updated. I mean, documents have changed titles and whatnot. So also we only wanted to list documents here that actually were substantive authority under SEPA and not just documents that happen to be city documents, so that it gets a little bit more streamlined. And then there's just some process updates again to match just the updates that we're working on there. And then just a slightly different change on where you apply. And that's it. So if there's any questions, yeah, we'd be happy to answer questions, or we can just jump right into the issues matrix.
Okay, commissioners? Commissioner West.
I just want to clarify, I think I understood the comment on this, but the point where it specifies the 100 and 200 unit developments, are those numbers taken from the new law?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's directly out of what the state has updated. We're just using their numbers.
Perfect.
And I have a cross-reference in there to the code section for the state law.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Commissioner Parna.
So thank you, Becky. I really like the mitigation measures and the performance measures, the way it's done. I think it's clear, and I think it's going to be really good for all of us. I just had one question. RCW 42, I don't know if I've got the number right, 21C 229.3. I know it's the residential infill piece, but I was just curious whether that would cover anything which would be where maybe we have a coffee shop, so that neighborhood commercial piece, because it states only housing in that, and I'm just curious what happens
Yeah,
then.
so let me go back to the PowerPoint quick.
We want our coffee shops.
Yeah. So what we could do as we look at the new neighborhood mixed use zone, we could consider adding that as 2A if we wanted to. But we couldn't do paragraph 3, if that makes sense. Right, so paragraph 3 does not allow mixed use or any sort of commercial. But what we could do is we could say for our neighborhood mixed use zone, we're going to actually apply 229.2A.
Okay, I think that clarification would be great. Thank you.
You go ahead and add that to the issues matrix because that would be a change to the table.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
sounds great. Thank you.
Yeah, I think add that to the issues matrix. Anything else? I'm not seeing anything. We're just mostly concerned about our coffee shops and in our neighborhoods. We really want them.
Okay. All right. No other issues related to the mitigation or any other questions?
Nope, we don't have anything right now.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. We have our public hearing on the 10th. We haven't received any comments yet, but I anticipate some will come in. We have a couple folks that are typically following this particular topic, so I'm assuming that they'll provide comments before or at the public hearing. So we'll be back on the 10th. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to Redmond 2050 Phase 2C elements, draft 3.0 of the land use, community development and design, and climate resilience and sustainability elements study session. Who's taking the lead on this, Glenn? Or?
I am, but I'm loading
Lauren.
the PowerPoint.
Whole list of names there, so I wasn't sure who was taking the lead.
There's a lot in this packet.
Yes.
Oh, did I? I'm in the meeting. All right. All right. So thank you very much for the opportunity to present this evening on land use community development, design, and climate resiliency and sustainability elements. I think this is our third and close to final drafts of these elements. So we'll kick it right off for our land use element. So this is a review. As a reminder, the land use element sets the direction and the future growth in the community. We often refer to it as the star of the show, although all of these elements and all of the parts of the comprehensive plan are important. This is the star of the show, the belle of the ball. The policy drivers for this, as a reminder, are a lot of the community conversations that we've been having around complete neighborhoods, and also focusing that growth on our centers. And then also our state and regional requirements, that requirement we've been talking a lot about this evening about accommodating middle housing and ensuring that our land capacity meets all of our housing needs and growth targets. So some significant policy updates from the previous comp plan. In the land use chapter, a greater variety of housing choices, this concept of complete neighborhoods that we've been talking about since I think last summer now, which resulted from a lot of our early visioning work that we've done, changing our mixed use designations, both in centers and citywide, and also exploring that different scale and intensities of our mixed use areas. So what's new in this draft? We added references to public infrastructure as it relates to land use. We updated language around sustainability to be consistent with the climate resiliency and sustainability chapter and element. We also added new policies to allow for expanded schools and standalone policies for childcare facilities. So we had those included within other policies, mentioning childcare facilities, mentioning schools, but we did 2 new standalone policies to kind of emphasize how important those things are. And we also strengthened critical areas protections and provided provisions for utilities in the land use chapter. So just a reminder, this is kind of our land use and designations and zones. And then did we want to go through the entire presentation and then kind of dive into each chapter, or did we want to pause?
Up to you.
In chunks? Okay. All right, so let's talk about land use then, if we wanted to do chunks. I'm going to pull up the Word version of the issues matrix so we can start to fill it in on this draft. So if I'm typing furiously, that's why. So I'll pull up a copy of, let's see, the land use chapter. Are there any comments, questions?
This is for the overall, anything from the public that we heard this evening. I'd like to get those entered into the issues matrix.
Okay.
I don't know if you were able to track those issues as they were being identified this evening. But
I can ask that they, I believe
they came in
David
written as well.
emailed them to will you will Devin email them as well?
Yeah, comments related to the climate element from Dr. Morton we received, and if you'd like, we can provide responses on that, but I'm going to speak to land use first.
Yeah, I mean, I can go back and listen and make sure that all of those comments are added. I haven't seen any of the email comments yet on land use, but I'll check the Planning Commission email and add those in here.
Yeah, for the comments tonight, I was just reviewing my notes on that. There are definitely pieces on the climate resilience element. I didn't see anything for land use specifically, so perhaps if we missed any on that they could emphasize that.
Okay.
By email, that would be great.
Commissioner Parna.
I might have a few comments, but I will send that over email as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, as soon as possible so we can get them in the issues matrix for next time. Okay. Anything else, or should we move on to community development?
I think. There were two existing.
Anything that we had from the previous draft was included into this draft. Anything from that issues matrix was, yeah.
Sorry, I'm confused. I'm looking at the climate resilience ones, and I'd lumped them in together.
There was nothing in land use.
Okay. Well, then I will.
Okay, so we'll move on.
We'll keep this party going. All right, community development and design element, third draft. So as a reminder, this is a brand new element. It consolidates the topics of community design, historic preservation, our centers policies, and it adds new sections for inclusive design and corridor planning. So this sort of took a while to take shape because you saw a lot of these sections separately, and now they're all together. So some of the policy drivers for this, maximizing our equitable housing and our equitable transit-oriented development. All of these are about accommodating our growth, maximizing our TOD opportunities. A lot of this chapter 2 is about simplifying and consolidating a lot of our policies, and then also especially focusing on that inclusive design and universal design. So what's new in this draft? Finally, all the sections together. And then as we started to bring the sections together, we realized there was a lot of duplication, and we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. We updated the introduction for the Southeast Redmond Manufacturing Center. We added existing conditions to the entire chapter. We moved some overlay policies, and I think maybe policy from downtown to citywide or a centers-wide policy. Once again, once we brought it all together, we realized, well, this could apply everywhere. Like, this doesn't need to be just an overlake. And then included a lot of new policies based on our fall 2023 and our winter 24 community engagement. So that's when we were doing a lot of those postcards. We're asking a lot of community-based organizations and members of the community, what sort of spaces make them feel comfortable and safe in Redmond. And we got a lot of feedback on that. And so we wanted to make sure that those were reflected in this draft. Did we want to discuss anything for community design? Yeah, let's go in.
So I just wanted to say how much I enjoyed reading this. I think it's a real hard balance to strike this, like, really looking forward to the growth, but also celebrating the way Redmond has been. And the existing conditions, I really liked the tone of it, because I think that there are really, like, nice parts of the city that this captured really well, but then also, like, folding it into the larger trend of urbanization and, like, how we're going to manage that balance. So I really thought this came together well.
Thank you.
Anything to add to the issues matrix? We're good.
All right. Whew. All right, I'll turn it over to Glenn. Do you want me to run the PowerPoint? Or can you take control?
Make sure this works. Okay. So the third draft of the climate resilience and sustainability element, just as a reminder, the city's has already been pretty proactive in regards to climate change type planning. As you noted here, that in the Redmond 2030 plan, that's the current comp plan, we actually have a lot of policies, existing policies related to this that have been kind of forced into different sections that maybe isn't like the perfect home, but we have policies in the utilities element and the natural environment element, but also scattered in other elements. And, as we did a scan initially earlier, we found at least 300 policies in the existing plan related to sustainability. But in addition to that, a lot of our other city documents are really, as folks kind of brought up, not at the policy level, but actually the strategic or programmatic level, as our community strategic plan, and more importantly, our environmental sustainability action plan. We have a climate declaration. We have a City of Redmond operations zero carbon strategy, a tree canopy plan, and then our other functional plans also incorporate a lot of more of our strategic or action type items related to climate resiliency. So that brings back to why are we doing a climate element, or what are we doing on that? Really, the intention of that is just to take kind of all those scattered policies and help prioritize, put it in kind of one location, and then provide that long-term policy guidance. We have all these different documents, but like, where is that one high-level comprehensive plan place? And so we also wanted to just kind of enhance, as needed, because a lot of those policies haven't been updated since the last comp plan. And instead, we have all these newer documents, and we just want to make sure. So we updated a lot of the existing policies as we moved into this climate element. But on the fourth bullet point, I just always want to keep reiterating is that there is a new state law that actually requires that we do climate resilience elements, and it has kind of requirements of how we're supposed to format that and stuff. But as noted here, Redmond and other cities or communities in the King County area aren't required to do it by 2029. So we want to be proactive in this. We're already doing a lot of work on this. I think we mentioned we did a climate vulnerability assessment as part of our SEPA process and things like that. And we just wanted to take advantage of all that work and develop a climate element. That being said, it's not trying to be all and everything at this moment. There isn't regulatory or zoning code or municipal code changes tied to adopting this initial element. Really, this is just kind of like the initial foundation. And at the same time, in the next couple of years, especially, we're going to be updating other documents, especially the ESAP, and that's where, and of course, there's guidance coming from the state right now and other organizations that we're all trying to meld this together. So there's definitely going to be a lot of opportunity in the future to update this and tweak this and, make sure alignment. But right now, we're really just trying to get that baseline aligned with the county, our existing stuff, the regional, and kind of state law. So that's just a reminder of the big picture of what we're doing here. And this outline, as you have seen a few times, kind of follows kind of the state guidance for this, but also pulls from our environmental sustainability action plan, especially in terms of some of the resiliency, kind of what we focus on. It doesn't preclude other issues. This is really what was identified in the ESAP as some of the higher issues. So you've seen the first and second drafts of policies, and the second draft had narrative and text. So we had additional feedback on the second draft, and this is just kind of a very high-level summary. We updated 6 policies just based on the staff, community, council, planning commission feedback. One of the main things we updated, we went back and changed CR1. We had a little bit more specificity to that. The second draft was a little less that, and we just made sure that aligned with the King County countywide policy. Additionally, our fire department recommended or asked for a policy on doing a wildfire protection plan that they're looking to do, and they wanted some policy work related to that. And we found that this element would actually be a good place to provide that policy guidance. So generally, that's the changes for the third draft, and I believe that's our presentation on what we call 2C of all our chapter updates of the comp plan. So with that, we can go into the issues matrix for the climate element, or if there's any new issues to bring up, or we can just review the existing.
So I know the issue 1 is a joint one, but from my side, we can close 1, 4, 8, 10, and 11. But Commissioner Weston has to weigh in on 1. But I have 2 new questions to be added to the issue matrix. One piggybacks on David Morton's comments, and please add all his comments into the issue matrix, as Chair and Vice Chair have already said. One of my comments piggybacks on it in terms of CR1 reads very well right now, but we don't have any policy that backs up measurement of those goals, 50% and so on. So basically, we need something which either reads as a separate policy on measurement, or it needs to, CR1 needs to include measurement and at what frequency. We cannot forget the frequency, that's important. And then another comment is, this is a question and then a comment. Does the ESAP use the climate vulnerability and risk assessment? So, and then how often does the ESAP get updated? Because CR9 talks about the climate vulnerability and risk assessment being used for data collection, but it says periodically update. We don't have a specificity on the time. So if we are using the climate vulnerability and risk assessment to inform the ESAP, then they should go at the same frequency of updates with a 1-year lag before. So we get the assessment before, and then we use that to update the ESAP. Given how quickly the climate conditions are changing, I would imagine things like water might come up a little higher heat might come up since the last assessment and ESAP. So we need to tie those two together at the same frequency, and those frequencies need to be in the policies.
I believe Jenny Liebeck's on the call. She might be able to speak to the frequency of the ESAP update. But I will note that comprehensive plans, it's a 10-year process.
Right.
And of course, there is the docket process where in between we can do updates to reflect changes to functional plans, state law, things like that.
Right.
But I'd let Jenny speak to the ESAP and other strategic documents on kind of the timing on that.
Yeah, so the ESAP, we commit to an update or a refresh of that plan every 5 years, just because we know with GHG mitigation measures and things like that, they change more over time, right? Technology changes, that kind of thing. The climate vulnerability assessment, even in the document itself, we didn't commit to making or any set frequency that we would update that assessment, primarily just because our vulnerabilities, right, are probably or likely going to stay pretty much the same, or there won't be any drastic changes quickly over time. So to your point, Commissioner Perna, the priority could shift a little bit. So maybe we see more emphasis on water conservation or water resources or something like that. But just to clarify, that is why there is no specification around updates to the climate vulnerability assessment.
I think it would be worthwhile to think about this a bit, because the way I look at it is we are courting a lot of growth. That is going to change how we assess, like what we assess and how we assess and what is the outcome of the assessment. So when that growth happens, especially if we have things which are not necessarily, like there's small time infill things or big things like overlake. So I think it would make sense to have some kind of frequency in there so that we know that in 10 years, when we look at the ESAP, it is keeping with and it's working in tandem. Because I think the climate vulnerability assessment is a fantastic document and a great study. And the ESAP works beautifully as well. But if they work together each time, we get a much better outcome and we can see problems coming from a mile away. It will also allow us to keep abreast with best practices, the science, because the 1.5 degrees, which is listed in CR1, is actually going to be broken in a year. It's already kind of redundant almost. The UN study is already showing that we hit the 1.5 mark last year. And in 24, we're likely to hit it again. So it's moving really rapidly, and I don't want it to be every 10 years that we are assessing this. And we have more people already in the city. So we need to be doubly careful. So any guidance on that or any clarity on that would be great. Thanks.
Can I jump in and add something? When we did the climate vulnerability assessment, we had the consultant build it in such a way that each and every piece of data that went into it had information about where it came from and how often that data set is updated. And it varies widely by data set. So some of the data sets are updated annually. Some of them are just updated periodically, and that could mean anything. And so we documented the different data sets, the frequency of the updates, where we could get them, if it's an automatic download that we could have set, or if we'd have to request the data. We also identified in there data sets that are missing that we could use, and that was given to Jenny and others to provide guidance for potential future grant requests, right? So we built the climate vulnerability assessment to be a function that could be updated when we can do it. So it's just a matter of resource allocation from a staffing perspective. But we have talked with our GIS folks. Jenny and I have really worked really carefully with the consultant when we built it so that it could be updated on a more frequent basis. But because the data sets come from so many different sources. It's hard to say we'll update it every 3 years, every 5 years, or whatever, right? But what we could do is we could work it into a regularly reoccurring program of checking what's been updated and plugging in the new data sets.
That sounds reasonable, Becky. It's just for me, when the ESAP is talking, it's based on some other data. It's not just some aspirational goals that we set up. It should be based off of where our city is at that point. So if that, maybe there's a small check just before the ESAP is updated to see what data sets we can get, and whatever we get, we take, right? I don't know, but I see both these documents talking to each other.
Could do. We could work with Jenny and GIS to, before she gets started on her next round, just double checking the data sources to see which ones have new data that we can plug in.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Commissioner Weston.
Can I piggyback on that to just ask where the right place to specify that is? Like, is it at the policy level or is it somewhere else? Because to me that, like, the policy actually seems a little bit higher up.
Yeah,
The update, like the update frequency, because I really agree with Commissioner Aparna's point.
I would say it's probably more at the strategic level, but also a lot of this work is done by consultants, you know, and a lot of that would go into the scope of work, the RFP. Those are some of those where you get a lot of that more detail of here's what you look at and here's the data you want to pull and how, you know, frequent and yeah.
Right, because
we generally don't get into at this level. At the policy level, we really want that 25-year big vision flexibility, and the details is really in these strategic plans or even.
Amazing. So when does that come back? Like, when would that specific, because I think what Commissioner Aparna is saying is important, but maybe not here.
There's a word called periodically. That is a word I'm having trouble with. It's in the policy right now. And it can mean periodically, what, once in 10 years, 15 years, I don't know. So I wanted clarity on that word, and that's why I asked. So it's already in the policy as it stands.
Right. I guess I understand what you're saying. I'm just, to me, this seems like the sort of thing that is normally specified somewhere else. So I'm just curious where that is specified and then when it will come back, whether it's that 5-year cadence or something else.
It gets back to a lot of our strategic plans. Like there's a lot of variables that determine. It could be in the municipal code, or it could just be like best available science practices. For example, the park plan has a requirement that they have to update every 6 years. You know, some of these water system plans, and I'm using these as examples of, like, there are set frequencies that, like, are recommended at state or federal level. I can't, speak specifically to environmental sustainability action plan, but it's also dependent on budget and other things or new state laws. And that's why we tend to use more flexible terminology at comp plan level, because there are a lot of variables where we don't want to get ourselves into what we sometimes say is an unfunded mandate or a requirement that says, hey, you need to update this every 3 years. Well, if we're in the process, it takes 3 years just to finish this one, then we put in a cycle where we're already having to put out a new RFP and scope out a brand new project while we're still trying to complete the previous. And
yeah, that actually.
Then as new state law comes out and all of a sudden, we have to pull everything back while we have a consultant working on something because the scope changed, so.
Absolutely. So there's absolutely a balance here between planning and execution. And we want the execution even more than we want the planning. But I was mostly just trying to get at, is the policy the right place to have that, even with that periodically? My sense would be not, from what you're saying, that there are other places that that's covered.
Generally, the best practice for comprehensive plans, unless there is specific state law requirements, which actually negates the need to have that specificity in the comp plan because it's already a state requirement. But we try to provide some guidance But we don't want to give specific numbers usually because, as I said, there's multiple variables. Periodically does say, though, don't do it once and never again. So there is a frequency, yes. And usually it's built into our strategic plans and stuff too. So I think Jenny might have had an additional comment on that.
Yeah, no, I was just going to note too that so we adopted our sustainability plan, our ESAP, in 2020. So we're actually starting to ramp up right now to refresh that plan next year. And so, you know, one of the comments too about not always wanting to be in a perpetual cycle of planning, because we do need to be, you know, implementing as well. So there is a careful balance there. And I very much respect what you're saying about the vagueness of periodically update the climate vulnerability assessment, but it is really trying to strike that balance of we did a very thorough review, and again, we don't anticipate that landscape changing dramatically, even within that 5-year, you know, period. And so it's just trying to give us flexibility that if we do need to update it during that time, we absolutely can. But if we find that the strategies that were identified and things like that still stand and are really beneficial for our planning work, that we don't have to just go back and update it just because we committed to it early on.
Thank you.
Okay.
I was just going to note, we pulled up the first issue in the issues matrix, as Commissioner Parno noted.
Yeah.
Vice Chair Weston and Council Member Nueva Camina are noted on this, so we just wanted to...
Yeah, I think we can close. I think it was an important point about the equity, but I think that's kind of woven through this document at this point, so I think we're good.
Okay. Anything additional? Otherwise, we'll take Dr. Morton's comments and try to provide a response on those as requested.
Okay.
Thank you.
All the rest of yours closed. I lost track of your numbers.
I believe those, the ones Commissioner Parno noted are all the open ones, number 5, 4, 8, 10, and 11.
Okay.
And we'll add number 12 as Dr. Morton's comments.
Never mind. Okay. So, anything else? Okay. Then we're done with this topic. And so then we will move on to Redmond 2050 monthly update briefing.
That will be Jeff.
Welcome, Jeff.
Good evening again. Just for a moment. All right, for the monthly update tonight, who's screen sharing? I think we can unshare. I want to do a couple things. One is to, in the memo, recap the mass timber workshop that was held on March 14th, and then also offer a preview of a couple other topics that are coming to the Planning Commission later this spring. Even if you're not going to be on the Planning Commission later this spring, you might find them interesting. I was able to attend part of the mass timber workshop and saw at least one Planning Commissioner in attendance in person. There may have been more either in person or online. The workshop was very well attended, about 50 people. One of the feedback themes was an appreciation for Redmond for proposing significant incentives to really help tip the balance in favor of feasibility for this type of product in the community. Many thanks to Becky Fry for organizing the event and especially in getting presenters on board to participate. Becky and Commissioner Sheffrin, who I saw, do either of you want to say anything about the event?
I just found it to be really informative, and I think it was almost too, we didn't have quite enough time to have audience participation, at least to ask questions at the end. And the architect, I think was it from Sweden, I really appreciated he bringing just a different perspective and to share some of the projects that he's been involved with, so I found that really interesting as well. Thank you for organizing it.
I'll just add, we got a ton of really positive feedback. I mean, the attendance there was really broad. The intention really was to record it so that we could provide it as an ongoing resource to property owners and developers who are just trying to think about, is it a good idea? They're just learning about mass timber, they're just learning about the incentives, and they want to explore it. We've heard a lot from our mass timber developers over the last year and a half about things that work and things that don't. And we wanted to convey a lot of that information to our developers and people who are thinking about it. So one of the things I asked them to really focus in on was, what do they need to start thinking about it from the very beginning to make sure that they get a successful project? And that's why I wanted to record it. And so we did get, it did go a little bit longer. We didn't have as much Q&A time at the end. So we've posted the recording and the materials. We are thinking about potentially having a second one in the fall that will allow for a little bit more interactive conversation with experts to help people drill in on some additional feedback. But we did get a lot of really positive feedback, and I've had a lot of emails and phone calls after the fact, just diving in a little bit more in depth into our incentive program and how it'll work and that type of thing. So. Standing room only.
It was. I was sitting by the sink because there was a. Well, that's okay. And then to highlight a couple things coming your way this spring, you've heard us talk about an allowed uses table a couple of times and how we think there could be a lot of improvements made to allowed use charts in the code. So in the monthly update memo, there is a little image of what a new table would look like. And I think what's important to understand about this is that, number one, there will be fewer lines in the table. We're trying to balance kind of specificity with also just kind of flexibility, I guess, and rolling up uses to the point where it makes sense. So that work is underway. The other thing to note is that currently this chart appears in some form in every zone chapter of the code, and then also at the beginning of the code 3 times. So there would be 2 tables in 2104 at the end of the day, a residential and lodging use table, and then a non-residential use table. And so that's the goal, that's what we're working toward, and so we hope to have something to you very soon. And then also later this spring, you'll be looking at 2 more functional plans. You've already seen parks and transportation for Redmond 2050. You haven't seen transportation, just kidding. You've seen parks, you've seen like the skeleton of transportation. What you will see is water and wastewater. They are mainly being updated to be consistent with Redmond 2050 and the preferred growth alternative, so that we can make sure that those plans are seen as far out into the future as Redmond 2050 is. And that is the conclusion of the monthly update.
Thank you. Okay.
Sorry to extend everybody's time. The use tables, are they being checked for people who are colorblind in terms of the colors?
We have tools to do that. We'll make sure that gets done.
It just might be, if there's a lot of information and it's all coded, then I don't know. So.
I think the colors in this case don't convey any meaning. They are used to separate kind of different types of zones, but you don't need to. There are other ways to determine that, but still, it's a useful tool to run it through.
We can do that.
Okay. Staff and commissioner updates.
Go ahead. Do you want to start?
Yeah, Ian is out today, so I actually don't recall what the staff updates
Okay,
were.
so there are some,
Yeah.
so the next meeting is
Yeah.
on, so a couple things actually. The next meeting is on April 10th. There are 3 public hearings scheduled. There is election of officers, so it's going to be a busy meeting. And we will do our best to structure it in a way that's going to get us out of here at a reasonable time on that night. There will be 3 new commissioners. They will be confirmed by council on April 2nd, next Tuesday. Some of them may also be there to get sworn in that night, or will be sworn in sometime between then and April 10th. If you want to watch that or attend, you're certainly welcome. there has been a considerable amount of public comment at the beginning of the council meetings lately, so the consent agenda has been rather late in the evening. They're also recorded if you want to watch it not live. April 17th, mark your calendars, that's the annual workshop. We do have 2 confirmed guest presenters, one being the Public Works Director, Aaron Burt, who's going to give us an overview of Public Works in Redmond, and the second being Philly Marsh, who will give us an update on the Economic Development Strategic Plan. She's the Economic Development Manager, as you may recall. We always look at the norms, the Planning Commission norms during the annual workshop, and we will also take the opportunity to maybe do a little brainstorming about the joint meeting with the City Council, which is May 14th. So it's about the right time to think about what is it that we'd want to talk about with the City Council on May 14th. Typically, we'll spend at least a little bit of time going over the work plan, but the rest of the time is really, it's really open, so we can figure out what we want to talk about at the annual workshop on April 17th. Those are the standard staff updates. And then we have, as part of the staff updates, we want to take a few minutes to reflect on the contributions of 2 commissioners, especially this evening, who are concluding their service at the end of the meeting tonight. So I'd like to start with Commissioner Sheffrin. Commissioner Sheffrin joined the commission in 2020, but her public service goes back many years before that and includes an urban planning career spanning 6 cities and 3 states, including right here at the city of Redmond. I learned how I did not know that before. I'm not sure, but I learned at one point that was at the city of Redmond. What I will remember most about Commissioner Sheffrin is her concern for those who are often at the margins of society to ensure that we are planning a community that embraces them. Commissioner Sheffrin also brings, even tonight, professional real estate expertise, and staff have appreciated your contributions to housing issues, especially during your tenure, including your attention to ensuring a diversity of home ownership opportunities. We look forward to seeing you serve the community in other ways in the coming years and wish you the very best. And as a small token of our appreciation and the appreciation of the mayor who has signed the certificate, I'm going to just walk this over to you. Okay, and Chair Nichols joined the commission in 2016, and like Commissioner Sheffrin, and like many of you, came to the commission with a long history of community service already. There was a council member who recently said that the commission materials can be boring. And while that may have a kernel of truth, though I would never admit to it, what I will remember about Chair Nichols is that everything is interesting to you. Even in recent weeks, you've been talking up the upcoming review and water and wastewater system plans, and even did so again tonight. So I think that sense of curiosity has made you an effective commissioner. Chair Nichols served for multiple years as the vice chair and the chair of the commission. That reflects both your colleagues' confidence in you as a leader and your willingness to take on the extra work associated with those offices. We look forward to seeing you serve the community in other ways in the coming years, maybe leading fewer meetings if that is your desire, and wish you also the very best and present these to you.
Well, let me just say it's been a pleasure to serve, and I've enjoyed my time on the commission, and I've been very appreciative and thankful of staff, and enjoyed working with all of you and my fellow commissioners. Any other commissioner updates?
Look, may I just follow that up by echoing exactly what you just said. I've learned so much, and I so commend staff because there are reams of details and documents and topics and so on. I mean, I really appreciate the deep thinking that every topic has caused you to spend time with, and especially with us these evenings. So thank you for all of your efforts. and also to my fellow planning commissioners and all of the input that's been provided as long as I've served. So thank you.
With that, I look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And we are adjourned.